We're going to continue the conversation on First Person, and Lieutenant Governor Matt Dent is here. Lieutenant Governor, we appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure.
You've been charged with looking at this problem, and just some context here, more suicides first quarter of last year in Kent and Sussex than in an entire year statewide. So obviously mental health, suicide, this is a problem in the state. Where do you start addressing this problem?
Well, there's some very specific steps that we started taking last year that were specific to the suicide issue. And a lot of that involves bringing in some training for our frontline personnel in our high schools and in our middle schools so that they can more quickly recognize signs in students, be able to help students know how to better deal with some of the depression symptoms and other things that can lead to suicide. So some of those things started last year, as well as some training that's more general in terms of students who have undergone trauma, being able again to detect who those students are and deal effectively with it. What the governor had asked me to do around fall of last year was more generally to see what we could do about child mental health services in our schools, because the suicides that we have had are one symptom of a child mental health problem, but there are a lot of others, and some of those symptoms are very subtle. Students who have behavioral problems in class, where they're creating a disruption and making it difficult for teachers to be able to do their teaching jobs, and some of them are obviously more dramatic. Students causing harm to themselves, students causing harm to other students. And when he and I visit schools, which we do all the time, and we ask teachers and principals, what do we need to be doing for you? More and more and more, that's what we're hearing from teachers and principals. So in the fall of last year, he asked me to try to figure out some concrete steps we could start to take to deal with the suicide issue specifically, but also more generally with this child mental health issue.
And obviously a lot of attention's been sort of downstate with this kind of cluster, but it's something that could happen anywhere, really.
We hear the problems all over, and again, they manifest themselves in different ways, but there are very few schools you could go into in the state right now where you wouldn't hear something from teachers that's somewhere along that range. And probably the largest volume of complaints that you hear is that behavior issue that I talked about, where you have teachers who aren't able to teach, kids who aren't able to learn because there are things going on in the classroom that in many cases are specifically mental health related and could be more effectively addressed if we had better mental health services in the schools. So what I did in the late fall, again at the governor's request, was to sit down with several of the people in our state who deal day to day with these issues. Child psychiatrist, the head of Delaware Guidance Services, the head of our child mental health services in the state, and we just talked about, in an ideal world, what would we be doing in our schools to try to better serve these kids? And they put together a list for me, and when the governor proposed his budget to the legislature last month, a number of the items that he proposed, new items, are drawn from that list.
You know, there was the report that the CDC put out last summer on the suicide clusters in Kent and Sussex County. Is what the state going to do in terms of how to address this problem? Are you expanding on what was recommended in that report?
Yeah, there's a lot of consistency between what we heard from the frontline providers and what the CDC recommended. For example, frontline personnel in the schools who have mental health training and who are able to detect kids who have problems early, help treat those kids, and help refer them to proper outside treatment. That's something that we have some amount in our high schools. We have wellness centers in all of our high schools that have mental health services in the wellness centers, and those are actually the most used service in our wellness centers. It's mental health services. But in our middle schools, we have very little right now. We only have 3 middle schools in the entire state that have people with mental health training in the schools, and the CDC had noted that was an issue. And so what the governor proposed was to go from 3 schools to 30 starting on July 1st of next year, in terms of the schools that have what we're calling behavioral health consultants in the schools. And these are people who can be in the school, help teachers, diagnose kids, deal with kids, and also make sure that those kids who have to get treated on the outside stick with their treatment plans. If there's medication involved, take their medication. It really just provides a backdrop for these kids. And although a lot of the symptoms that we see are in high school and even in adults, many of these problems start to manifest themselves in the middle school years.
You know, we're talking about maybe at least 10 more counselors in these middle schools. Is 10 enough?
Ideally, you'd have one in every school, but by going from 3 to 30, what we're going to be able to do is to have at least one in every school district in the state. So hopefully, if there is a middle school in a school district that doesn't have one, and there are kids who are presenting certain issues in that middle school, the behavioral health consultant can provide services to the other middle school as well. You know, we're in very tight budget times, so you can never do everything that you want, but we think that going from 3 to 30 is a huge step forward. One other thing that we're doing is in our Medicaid and our CHIP program, we're going to start reimbursing pediatricians for consulting with child psychiatrists. When a child comes to a pediatrician, that's one of those moments when you have someone observing a kid, talking to the parent, what's going on with your kid. And right now, if there is a mental health issue that presents to the pediatrician, they don't have any option other than to refer this child to a psychiatrist and have that child wait for weeks or even months and before they get in to see an expert. What we're going to do now with Medicaid and CHIP is we'll reimburse the pediatrician and the psychiatrist for a half an hour consult where the pediatrician can get on the phone that week with the psychiatrist, talk to them, here's a kid, here's the issue, you know, what's the best plan for this child, and be able to deal with it more quickly, more efficiently, and in many cases save kids from having to go visit another professional who may not, you know, be necessary in that case. So we're trying to be smart about these things, and again, that's something that was recommended to us by the treatment professionals in the state.
And there's been a connection between this mental health issue that we've been talking about going back for months and now the gun issue.
Sure.
Is there something the state needs to do more comprehensively on mental health? It's important to take care of the kids who need those kind of services, but more broadly across the state with mental health issues.
There's always more that you can do. The biggest deficiency that we have numerically is with child mental health services. The CDC actually has ratios where you want to have, you know, a certain number of psychiatrists per population, psychologists for your population, and where we have the biggest deficits is for services for children. And one reason for that actually goes back to the absence of folks in the schools. For a private practitioner who's doing mental health services, it's difficult to maintain a practice with kids because kids, more than adults, don't stick with treatment plans, don't take medications, miss visits. So when you have people in the schools who are helping to backstop these families and make sure that these kids follow through in their treatment plans, that actually makes it a lot easier to develop the number of professionals that we would like to have in the state that we don't have now for child mental health services. So yes, we'd like to be doing better across the board, but the numerical deficiencies are overwhelmingly on the child side.
While we have you here, let's switch topics a little bit and go to workers' comp. And kind of you're leading a task force on that. Tell us what the purpose of that is. What's the meaning behind that?
We need to get the rates to stop going up. Back in 2007, we enacted a number of reforms, got the rates down by over 40%, which was a huge benefit to the state's business community. Went from third worst in the country all the way to 13th best in the country just in a couple of years. And in the last 2 years, the rates have been going back up again. They're up 26% total over the last 2 years. And as good as that news was in 2007 for our businesses, 26% increase is bad news for our businesses. So we're getting together a lot of the people who were involved back in 2007 and getting those rates down, looking at what has happened in the last couple of years and trying to get back to where we were. And we're very confident that we can. We did it before. We know what we need to do to get the rates under control, and it looks like we just need to go back and backfill some problems that have developed since then. But we need to deal with that. Our businesses in this economy are already having to cut corners everywhere. We just can't afford to have them seeing double-digit workers' comp increases every year.
And we are seeing you sort of have a little bit of a higher profile as the second term of the Markell administration starts. Is it kind of just a coincidence, or you hope to have a sort of expanded role the second 4 years of the Markell?
I feel like I've been pretty busy the last 4 years. I think you guys are just paying more attention.
Okay.
The governor's been very good since we took office about helping me get done what are my priorities and asking me to help him fulfill his. And I'm glad that that's continuing. It's a great working relationship that we have.
All right, Matt, thank you very much for being here. We know we're pulling you in between meetings, so we appreciate your time. Lieutenant Governor Matt Denn has been our first person this week.